Hi class, it's Miss Miller, and today what I want to do is talk to you about one of the primary, or at least one of the initial rhetorical devices used in Julius Caesar. And we're going to be talking about the significance of puns in literature, a case study in Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. You probably recognize by now that the text itself is of course, it's by Shakespeare, is going to be challenging, and that's because he used quite a bit of rhetorical devices, one being a pun, in his work to sort of make it a little bit more complex. And he had to communicate things that he could not be as explicit with during that time. So he did it in a way that only the most curious could access. So puns defined in the purpose, and I did change the meaning a little bit, so please make note of that. I did omit the meaning, or so I crossed it out. But puns typically are humorous ambiguity that relies on two or more words with identical or similar pronunciations, but are completely different in the meaning. So you should know that puns present a comedic they can present both a comedic or a serious effect. Most times, especially with Shakespeare, it's comedic, but there are times where authors will try to combine the two and have a comedic and a serious effect on the work. Now, because it's comedic doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying things that are funny. Perhaps the audience might be observing a character who is being sarcastic and he's attempting to be funny. However, the other individual or character may not take a liking to that. And so one character responds with a pun, and we as the audience recognize, like, oh my goodness, he is being funny. But the other character responds in a way that suggests maybe they are not as thrilled by the pun, the intended pun, and the person who's watching or observing finds it to be quite funny. So authors can present puns to be both funny and humorous at the same time as serious. But oftentimes, most times, especially with Shakespeare, it's comedic. Puns also provide an additional layer of complexity to a work. So you have to admit, when you're reading something, you might say, oh my goodness, what's going on? There's a play on words here. I'm not really clear what's happening. It slows you down as a reader, and you have to acknowledge, like, one, this is a pun, and two, now I need to dissect the meaning. Like, what is the intended meaning? What is the original meaning? And you have to make sense out of it. So it adds a layer of complexity. It makes it more challenging. Not the average reader is going to be able to, most people might take it for granted, but it's not gratuitous. Like, you have to appreciate the language, make sense out of it, and find the layers and the meaning. So continue analyzing the text beyond the surface read. Puns clarify situations in a literary text, and they reveal alternating perspectives. They show different points of view, a different way, a lens in which to look at a text. The key to puns is to recognize, and this is not always the case, this is obviously with pronunciations, but homophones. Obviously, if there's a meaning, then you're not going to experience or see homophones, but words that have similar pronunciation as another word. So I'm sure you've been introduced to it in the text, and a great way to identify a pun is when you see a word and you go, wow, that sounds like another word, but it has a different meaning, and that would be an indication that you're probably reading a pun that was deliberate or intended in the text. So here are some steps. One, the author identifies a need for comedic relief, or we've identified before, it might be a serious moment. The author selects a homophone pair to communicate a message, and then the author then creates a joke using the homophones in place. So that's the sort of how the evolution of puns show up in a work. So let's take a look at what puns might look like in Julius Caesar. Act 1, Scene 1. This one isn't necessarily a homophone. It's not one of the keys to puns. It's more of a meaning, so pun by meaning. If you look at this one, the cobbler says, truly, sir, in respect of a fine workman, I am but, as you would say, a cobbler. And then Mariolus, but what trade art thou? Answer me directly. So cobbler says, we know a cobbler is someone who fixes shoes, but also a cobbler is slang during that time, or was slang during that time, but it's also someone who puts things together clumsily. So now you have two meanings for cobbler, and we're not sure which one the cobbler actually means. We know he means, we can assume, right, that he's someone who fixes shoes because that's what a cobbler does. But I am, would you say, a cobbler, someone who puts things together? That's not, maybe that's perhaps how Morales might interpret it, but not the cobbler. So we have the traditional soul versus souls, and that would, you could use heels. There's a lot of different things, puns that you could use for homophones, but this one would be a mender of bad souls, right? Versus I can mend you, right? So we know that it says a mender of bad souls. Really, he's saying, I can mend you. He's referring to like, I can fix your soul. And then he says, which indeed, sir, and this is the cobbler, a trade, sir, that I hope I may use with a safe conscience, which is indeed, sir, a mender of bad souls. And of course, Marlis is upset. He's frustrated. He becomes increasingly more and more angry because the cobbler is very indirect. He's almost, as some of you might have mentioned or noticed, is passive aggressive in a sense. And so even though he's intended, the pun here is, he's looking into your soul. I can mend you. I can fix you. Of course, the other character is offended by this. What do you mean you're going to fix my soul? Well, we know, he fixes souls. He fixes shoes. So actually, he's telling the truth, right? So you have to admit that the cobbler is quite witty, quite intelligent, and we know he's quite skillful as well. So the owl, this is interesting too. We see, why sir, cobble you, thou art a cobbler, but truly, sir, all I live by is with the owl, and I meddle with no tradesman matter, no woman's matter, but with owl I'm indeed, sir, a surgeon to old shoes. When they are in great danger, I recover them, as proper men as ever trod upon neat's leather have come upon my handiwork. So we see owl, and owl is actually like a tool that, you could use it to fix belts and kind of, give you more room in a belt. But then you could also use it, cobblers use it to punch holes in their shoes, leather shoes. So this is the tool that's used. So it's like, I live, truly, sir, all I live by is with the owl. So yeah, a cobbler, it's true. A cobbler uses this owl all the time. And then he goes on to say, but I meddle with no tradesman's matters, no women's matters, but with all. And I want to say that in the text, it might have said the word all. It depends on which version of the text in terms of ALL and as opposed to AWL. And silver is another one. So if you look, I don't recall which scene this was in, but this is Cicero. And we have a character here who is sort of saying, silver hairs. And silver hairs has like a double meaning here. In one sense, it shows Cicero is maturing in age and he's getting older. But at the same time, this silver, and you could see in the subsequent lines, in the second and third lines that follow, the silver coin can be used to purchase or buy. So we don't know which one the character is using or the intended pun here. But silver hairs will purchase us a good opinion and buy men's voices to commend our deeds. So let's see if we can practice this. Where is the pun here? So we have Mark Antony and Octavius in an exchange here, and we have, Octavius, lead your battle softly on upon the left hand of the even field. And Octavius responds, upon the right hand I keep thou the left. And Antony says, why do you cross me in this exigent way? And Octavius says, I do not cross you, but I will do so. So it gets really confusing here. And so let's look for clues. I want you to look at this line and see if you can tell where is the pun in this situation. Here's your first clue. Obviously, there's an exchange between two characters. They've mentioned a word twice, right? One person uses it one way, and another character in the dialogue references it in a different way. So it has two separate meanings. So the first one is cross, right? Why do you cross me? Why do you contradict me? Why are we in conflict, right? And then we see Octavius with, I do not cross you. And he means it literally, like I'm not going to the other side, or I might cross you on that stage. And I do not cross you, but I will do so. So he's taken it literally, whereas Anthony is sort of using the pun in that situation. That's how Shakespeare applies the pun to his work. So this was just a quick tutorial on the significance of puns in literature, case study in Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. And so you probably will recognize this throughout the text, more so in the initial acts, especially in Act 1 and Scene 1 and 2, you'll recognize some puns in the work. Hope that was helpful.